and welcome to this week's edition of World Today, where we will be discussing Afghanistan, which continues to remain in focus with questions being raised within the country on the decision by Biden administration to withdraw troops completely from Afghanistan. Also focus on the Indo-Pacific and AUKUS. But first up, the headlines. In chaotic weeks in Britain, fights broke out at gas stations and people filled up old water bottles with petrol as the country has been reeling under acute supply shortages of fuel. While the government has put army on standby, there is no sign of the end of petrol panic buying, with petrol stations replete with long queues in London. In an explosive deposition to US lawmakers, General Mark Milley testified that US military officials did not give President Biden a unanimous recommendation to leave Afghanistan until 10 days after the fall of its capital city of Kabul. US lost war in Afghanistan through miscalculations spanning multiple administrations, Milley told lawmakers. While major countries of the world are moving on to booster shots for their citizens, the UN and WHO have raised concerns over equal access to vaccines for people from developing and least developed nations who still are waiting to be provided with COVID vaccines. September of 2021, the United States of America, the United Kingdom and Australia came up with a military alliance called AUKUS with a view to dominate the South China Sea region in particular and the Indo-Pacific in general. With the announcement of the AUKUS came details of what it is going to achieve. One was to deliver nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, and that set the cat amongst the pigeons from Beijing to Paris. Let's take a look at how the world reacted to this military alliance.
China has seen AUKUS as another attempt by the US and UK to try and bulldoze into China's own backyard. And France called it a sneaky stab in the back by their oldest friend, the United States of America. But the French anger was assuaged when Presidents Biden and Macron kissed and were seen to be making up. The statements that followed varied ever so slightly in English and French translations, but served their purpose of calming things down between the US and France.
Mr. President, how do you plan on repairing the US-French relations? That's great.
Two countries besides China most upset with AUKUS are Malaysia and Indonesia. The other ASEAN members too are not happy as well, because they don't want a US-China arms rivalry accidentally setting off an incident in their territory. Japan, South Korea and Taiwan, traditional unfriendlies of China, are the countries in the Asia-Pacific region that have reason to support the AUKUS pact. The Foreign Minister of Japan, Toshimitsu Motegi, welcomed the security cooperation between Australia and the United States and the launch of AUKUS. But Australia's next-door neighbour, New Zealand, which has always had a strong anti-nuclear stance, is certainly not happy. Reacting to the announcement of AUKUS, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said Australia's nuclear submarines will not be allowed in New Zealand waters. In Europe, there has been a sense of disappointment that the US under President Biden was still as erratic as might have been expected when President Trump was in charge. There has been anger over the way the French deal got scuttled. The presidents of the European Commission and the European Council sharply condemned what they saw as a snub for the Union, not just for France.
Inside the Council, and my duty is to explain what has happened inside the Council, the position has been this clear expression of solidarity with France and the consideration that this was not a bilateral issue, but a relationship with the European Union that affects all of us, and also the fact that it doesn't go in the direction of a greater cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, which is our purpose.
Russia seemed to not want to commit immediately. Moscow issued a statement that said before forming a position, we must understand the goals, objectives, means. These questions need to be answered first. There is little information so far. In Australia, the reaction to AUKUS has been cautious because in matters of trade and commerce, there is much at stake. Australia relies heavily on business with China, accounting for 31% of Australia's trade with the world. And that makes China Australia's largest two-way trading partner in goods and services. To push through AUKUS, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison needed the support of the opposition Australian Labor Party, ALP. And the conditions that ALP imposed included that there would be no nuclear weapons and that Australia would not infringe its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
We're just doing what we need to do to keep Australians safe and protect our national interests. I mean, China do the same thing. They have massive investments in their military capabilities, including in this area, and Australia doesn't raise issues around that. All countries will take decisions in their national interests. We believe this will add to the peace and stability and security of the region. And that is, I think, a view that is widely shared about the impact of this arrangement, and we encourage all countries in the region to engage in that way.
Prime Minister Morrison has categorically said that AUKUS will not involve the proliferation of nuclear weapons in the Indo-Pacific region. Scott Morrison said that Australia has no plans to acquire nuclear weapons and that this proposal will remain consistent with Australia's long-standing commitment to nuclear non-proliferation. The Global Times newspaper of China on 16th of September headlined, "Naive Australia foots the bill for US gambit." In China, the sentiment is that Australia has become a pawn for the US and that Australia could face the most dangerous consequence of being cannon fodder in the event of a military showdown in the region.
On Spotlight this week is US Army General Mike Milley's deposition at the US Senate Armed Services Committee regarding his advice to President Biden on troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. Here are some excerpts from the deposition.
Yes, my assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that, in order to move toward a negotiated, gated solution.
Did you ever present that assessment personally to President Biden?
I don't discuss exactly what my conversations are with the sitting president in the Oval Office, but I can tell you what my personal opinion was, and I'm always candid.
We're evacuating everyone. That was not a recommendation that you personally held? That
Absolutely not. At that point, on the 25th of August, no. At the 25th of August, we recommended that the mission end on the 31st.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Was it the unanimous recommendation of the Joint Chiefs that the August 31st date should be observed? And if so, why was that the military advice?
It was of the Joint Chiefs, plus General McKenzie, General Miller, and General not Miller, but Admiral Vaisley and General Donahue. The reason is risk to force, risk to mission, and risk to the American citizens. On the 1st of September, we were going to go to war again with the Taliban. Of that, there was no doubt. And we were already in conflict with ISIS. So at that point in time, if we stayed past the 31st, which militarily is feasible, but it would have required an additional commitment of significant amounts of forces, probably 18th Airborne Corps, 15, 20, maybe 25,000 troops. We would have had to re-seize Bagram. We would have had to clear Kabul, the 6,000 Taliban that were already in Kabul. That's what would have happened beginning on the 1st. And that would have resulted in significant casualties on the U.S. side, and it would have placed American citizens that are still there at greater risk, in my professional view and in the view of all the other generals. So on the 25th, we recommended that we transition to a diplomatic option beginning on the 31st.
I can only conclude that your advice about staying in Afghanistan was rejected. I'm shocked to learn that your advice wasn't sought until August 25th on staying past the August 31 deadline. I understand that you're the principal military advisor, that you advise, you don't decide, the president decides. But if all this is true, General Milley, why haven't you resigned?
Senator, as a senior military officer, resigning is a really serious thing. It's a political act if I'm resigning in protest. My job is to provide advice. My statutory responsibility is to provide legal advice or best military advice to the president, and that's my legal requirement. That's what the law is. The president doesn't have to agree with that advice. He doesn't have to make those decisions just because we're generals. And it would be an incredible act of political defiance for a commissioned officer to just resign because my advice is not taken. This country doesn't want generals figuring out what orders we are going to accept and do or not. That's not our job. The principle of civilian control of the military is absolute. It's critical to this republic. In addition to that, just from a personal standpoint, you know, my dad didn't get a choice to resign at Iwo Jima, and those kids that are at Abbey Gate, they don't get a choice to resign. And I'm not going to turn my back on them. I'm not going to resign. They can't resign, so I'm not going to resign. There's no way. If the orders are illegal, we're in a different place. But if the orders are legal from civilian authority, I intend to carry them out.
To that explosive deposition by Mark Milley, there was a prompt response by White House for decision made by President Biden and his administration on troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, and thereafter its fall to the Taliban.
The president made clear that the advice was split. He didn't outline what every individual conveyed to him in private advice, as I don't think anyone in the American public would expect. Obviously, they're testifying before Congress today. They're answering questions accurately. They're providing more detail on their advice, as they should. That's how that process works, and as they should. I think what the American people should know is the president is always going to welcome a range of advice. He asks for candor. He asks for directness. And in any scenario, he's not looking for a bunch of yes men and women. And what that means is that ultimately he's going to have to make the decision about what's in the best interest of the United States. If there's conflicting advice given, by necessity, some people's advice will not be taken.
Britons in the past few weeks have faced acute fuel shortage. Many say it is because of panic buying, but there are other reasons such as change in taxation and immigration laws following Brexit. The British government, however, denies the shortage is due to Brexit and have cited other factors such as the pandemic and surging fuel prices. Here is all you need to know about UK's ongoing fuel crisis.
Thousands of British gas stations ran dry as motorists scrambled to fill up amid a supply disruption due to shortage of truck drivers. Cars could be seen queuing down a busy road at a petrol station in Islington, North London, as passers-by heard drivers shouting and swearing at each other.
I think it's a joke, to be honest, especially with key workers like us. I mean, I've got a quarter of a tank now and I'm struggling to find fuel.
Many gas stations around Britain shut down in the past 5 days after running out of fuel, a situation exacerbated by panic buying among some motorists. The supply problems stem from a shortage of as many as 100,000 truck drivers. Those people qualified to drive heavy goods vehicles or lorries that carry fuel from terminals to petrol stations. Add to that the pandemic-related disruption to driver training, an aging workforce and an exodus of foreign workers following tax changes and tightened immigration laws introduced by the UK after Brexit.
The only thing we can do at the moment to get back to some sort of normality is to get the 100, 200 military drivers to actually start delivering to full cops, because all of the tankers at the refineries are full up with diesel and petrol, ready to go. We just need some drivers' bums on seats.
The UK has put army troops on standby to help distribute gasoline and help ease the fuel drought triggered by a shortage of truck drivers that has drained hundreds of pumps and sent frustrated drivers on long searches for gas.
They're today saying that they're training up the army to do the filler pumps. Why haven't they done that 2 weeks ago? I just think it's ridiculous.
It takes any one versed in military defence issues knows that it takes a couple of days, sometimes a few days, to get troops on the ground. We've decided to do that, and I think in the next couple of days people will see some soldiers driving the tanker fleet.
Meanwhile, the government is trying to ensure that the fuel drought is eased.
I think the situation clearly is stabilising. If we look at the inflows, the deliveries of petrol, they were matched yesterday by the sales. So that means that the situation is stabilising. I think people are behaving quite responsibly, actually. I think people should buy petrol as normal. And clearly we've got the army on standby. We've made preventative measures. We've tried to alleviate the HGV driver shortage by waiving visa rules. We're working very closely with the industry, my department, and the Department for Transport, and I think the situation is stabilising, as you say.
Healthcare organizations and teachers' groups are calling for essential workers to be given priority for fuel supplies. The government has offered to allot free temporary visas to at least 5,000 foreign lorry drivers till Christmas to stop the situation from spiraling out of control. While other countries, including the United States and Germany, also are experiencing a shortage of truck drivers, the problem has been specially visible in Britain.
Time for a short break. On the other side, we'll be talking about vaccine equity. While developed countries have moved to booster shots, underdeveloped and developing countries are still trying to complete vaccination of their population. Details on the other side. Welcome back to World Today. Now, one of the riding themes at the United Nations General Assembly session this year and the political discourse across the globe has been about gender equality. But the reality is farthest from the vision. While some strides have been made, the world is still left wanting in achieving the goal of gender parity. Here's a report.
My final point is about inclusiveness. We cannot save our planet if we leave out the vulnerable. The women, the girls, the minorities. The silent pandemic of gender-based violence can prove lethal to the health of our societies. The president of the...
This has been the resounding opinion across spectrum, but the reality is different.
Over the past 2 decades,
even the world's highest body, the United Nations, 13 women speakers were there over the first 4 days, an increase from last year, when just 9 women spoke over the course of the session.
One of the last holdouts of reform is the United Nations Security Council.
There are also 3 more female heads of state or heads of government, 24, much more than there was at this point in 2020.
And adaptive global institutions.
Mr. President, I wish to take note of the Secretary General's report on our common agenda, which raises key issues of our common concern, such as gender equality, climate change, and youth development. On gender equality, COVID-19 is threatening to roll back the gains which we have made. As the first female president in the history of my country, the burden of expectation to deliver gender equality is heavier on my shoulders.
While the UNGA espouses the cause of gender equality, much is still to be achieved regarding women's representation and participation.
To turn the negative trends around again, we continue to support the rights of women and girls around the world. There can be no democracy, no security, no development without one half of the humankind.
While the theme of vulnerability has been at the forefront, the world was made aware of the ever-looming spectres of doom for women in conflict areas. But Iraq has opened the doors for more women representation despite resistance.
At the beginning, I entered through the women's quota, and the quota was form of affirmative action, and it protects the presence of women in the House of Representatives. At this time, we were suffering from sectarianism. Being a moderate woman was very difficult. The sect would constitute protection for those who seek its protection, and some would use it as an identity. I did not use it. My identity was feminist. That was my identity.
With Iraq's parliamentary elections slated to be held next month, the electoral gender quota system is paving the way for more women to participate in the political process. In the diverse city of Kirkuk, each ethnic group has nominated a number of women candidates for the upcoming election. The gender quota system in Iraq is paving the way for women to gain seats in parliament without having to compete with men. According to this system, women only go head-to-head with female opponents and need half the number of votes that men need to enter parliament. On the other hand, in a landmark for gender equality in the North Atlantic island nation, Iceland has elected a female majority parliament.
Tonight is the time to celebrate a job well done. The first numbers give us hopes for good final results. Let's enjoy the evening. This is a democratic celebration. We, the Independence Party, have shown again and again that we love democracy. We celebrate the elections and they are in our favor tonight.
After all votes were counted, female candidates held 33 seats in Iceland's 63-seat parliament, the Althing. The milestone for women comes despite a poor outcome for parties on the left, where female candidates are more often frontrunners. While brave, courageous strides are being made towards gender parity, an ideal situation in an increasingly volatile world is still a long way off.
The US president received his booster dose in the last week of September. United States of America and European countries have started booster shots for their citizens. However, the United Nations and World Health Organization have been insisting that developed countries stop these booster doses because many African nations and least developed countries are yet to fully vaccinate their citizens because of short supply of the vaccines.
For the second shot, Mr. President?
No, I haven't any side effects the first or second shot.
A booster shot for the American president. Joe Biden received his booster dose of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine at the White House.
Opportunity to make sure we get it.
This after the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, approved a third dose for Americans over 65, those with underlying health conditions and frontline workers at higher risk of exposure to the coronavirus.
Hello, everybody. How you doing? Adults with certain underlying health conditions like diabetes and obesity, and those who are at increased risk of COVID-19 because of where you work or where you live, like healthcare workers, teachers, first responders, grocery store clerks. If you fall into these categories, you're eligible for the booster.
54% of Americans are fully vaccinated, but a vast majority still remain skeptical. After getting his booster dose, Biden again appealed to unvaccinated Americans.
Boosters are important, but the most important thing we need to do is get more people vaccinated. The vast majority of Americans are doing the right thing. Over 77% of adults have gotten at least one shot. About 23% haven't gotten any shots. And that distinct minority is causing an awful lot of us an awful lot of damage for the rest of the country. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. That's why I'm moving forward with vaccination requirements wherever I can.
Good morning, good morning. We're allowed to hug, right?
A day before the US president got his booster jab, the world's first person to receive the COVID-19 vaccine jab got her booster dose. The 91-year-old grandmother from the United Kingdom, Margaret Keenan, got the jab alongside nurse May Parsons, who administered Keenan's first vaccine in December last year. The United States, United Kingdom, Israel, Germany, France, China, Chile, Argentina, Czech Republic are some of the countries that have offered the third vaccine shot to its citizens. What is a booster dose? A booster dose is just another dose of the vaccine to prolong immunity if there's evidence that protection is waning after a while. But the question is there a need for a booster shot? Medical experts are divided over the subject. Many believe that booster shots can be helpful in building stronger immunity against the virus. Others, including the World Health Organization, have questioned the timing of the booster rollout at a time when many countries are facing a scarcity of vaccines.
So why don't we just get this vaccine to where it's needed? Now, some countries giving lots of vaccine and doing boosters and giving it to some children, I find that difficult because from my point of view, as somebody who's responsible for world issues, I just can't distinguish between a person in the UK or a person in Uruguay who's at risk of the disease. I want to see the vaccine available to everybody. So I'm still pushing against this business of using lots of vaccine in a few countries when we've got the shortage, especially because this virus is constantly changing and new variants are emerging quite regularly. So we have to have a worldwide approach to it and not a country-by-country approach.
It was also the most talked about issue in the recent UN General Assembly meet in New York City.
Rich countries hoard life-saving vaccines while poor nations wait for trickles. They now talk of booster shots where developing countries consider half doses just to get by. This is shocking beyond belief and must be condemned for what it is, a selfish act that can either be justified rationally or morally.
A majority of the wealthier world vaccinated, over 90% of Africans still waiting for the first dose. This is a moral indictment of the state of our world. It is an obscenity. We passed the science test, but we are getting an F in ethics.
Another European Union country to start booster doses this week is Romania. Most countries in Africa haven't even been able to administer the first dose of vaccine to its citizens. Bureau Report, India Today.
That's all in this edition of World Today. But before I go, I'll leave you with visuals of the volcano on La Palma, which is part of the volcanic Canary Islands, northwest of Africa and home to 85,000 people. A church on the Spanish island of La Palma crumbled after lava from an erupting volcano entered the town of Todoque and reached the building. The dramatic scene caught on camera showed a cloud of dense smoke engulfing the bell tower of the church before it collapsed, disappearing from the horizon. Goodbye and take care.